Darren Finch had long since given up on dreams bigger than the next paycheck. A grease-stained mechanic buried on a fringe mining outpost, he knew every busted freighter and drunk pilot by name. So when he found an unconscious woman sprawled behind his hangar, her armor cracked like an eggshell and humming with power far beyond local smugglers, he thought it was just another headache the universe threw his way. He almost left her there. Trouble never stayed small in a place like this. But something in the way she lay so still, gauntleted hand curled tight around a scorched helmet, forced him to drag her inside. Her armor hissed and sparked when he tried to move her onto the workbench. Darren winced as he pried the chest plate open with an old plasma cutter. Beneath the plating, he found layers of alloys he'd never seen, shimmering like oil on water, pulsing with dormant circuits that flickered warnings in a script he didn't recognize. "Who the hell are you?" he muttered, pressing a calloused palm to her neck to feel for a pulse. That beat steady, defiant. Whoever she was, she refused to die in this rust bucket of a place. He locked the hangar doors, then set to work. Hours bled into dawn as he stripped away scorched plates and rerouted power lines. He used every trick he'd learned fixing mining bots and mercenary gunships. His fingers ached, eyes raw from welding sparks. But each plate he restored seemed to ease the woman's shallow breathing. Outside, the outpost woke up in fits and coughs of cheap engines. Darren ignored it. He couldn't help but talk to her as he worked, as if she might hear him through fevered dreams. "You picked the wrong pit to crash in, lady. Lucky for you, I don't sleep much." At some point, he caught himself brushing grime from her temple. It startled him how young she looked beneath the cracked visor. A jagged scar traced her jawline, old and well-earned. Whoever she was, she'd survived worse than his torch and pliers. When he finally collapsed into his chair, her armor was whole again, at least enough to keep her alive. Power nodes pulsed a gentle blue under the reinforced chest plate. He had rewired the hidden servos so delicately they purred like a sleeping cat. She still hadn't woken. Before exhaustion dragged him under, Darren noticed a faint projection blinking on her wrist. A holographic sigil, coiling and shifting like a living crest. He didn't know the symbol, but some gut instinct whispered, "This is no bounty hunter. This is someone who could buy and sell this entire rock of an outpost." Sleep came anyway, heavy and dreamless. Outside the hangar, a pair of patrol drones hovered by the gates, scanning for fugitives. They didn't know what lay inside that ragged mechanic's shop, and neither did Darren. He'd just fixed the armor of a ghost of stars when Saris woke. It was like lightning crawling under her skin. One heartbeat she lay trapped in murky dreams of betrayal and cold steel. The next she sat bolt upright on Darren's workbench, sending half his tools clattering to the floor. He almost dropped his mug of instant coffee. "Whoa, easy. You were nearly dead 12 hours ago." Her eyes locked on him, two shards of green fire under that half-shattered helmet. She scanned the hangar in a single, precise sweep. Tools, fuel drums, the battered hull of an old miner's skiff. Then her gaze landed on the repaired chest plate he'd left open to breathe. "You touched my armor," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but something in it vibrated the air, like a whisper of thunder. "Yeah, I fixed it," Darren snapped back, masking his unease with dry sarcasm. "You're welcome, by the way." She stared at him so long he wondered if she'd gut him for the favor. Then, with an audible click, she powered down the helmet and removed it. Underneath, the steel-hard glare softened into something more human. She was younger than he'd guessed, but her eyes were ancient in a way that made his chest tighten. "Who are you?" he asked, though he half expected no answer. "Ceres," she said simply. "No title you'd believe. And you are?" "Darren Finch, mechanic. Not in the habit of patching up walking artillery." For a heartbeat, a ghost of amusement flickered across her lips. Then she winced, her ribs protesting every breath. Instinct made Darren step closer to help her adjust the chest plate, but she caught his wrist with lightning speed. Her grip could have crushed his bones. "No sudden moves," she warned, her tone gentle but ironclad. He lifted his free hand in surrender. "I'm not one of them, lady. Just a guy who hates seeing good hardware go to waste." She released him and let him tighten the final seal. Close up, Darren spotted fresh scars webbing her side. Plasma burns and blade marks only a lunatic would survive. When she tried to stand, she swayed. He caught her elbow, steadying her despite the instinct to flinch from the power humming under her armor. Outside, voices rose in the dusty streets. Shouts, then a scream. Raiders! Darren's stomach dropped. They hadn't had an organized raid here in months. His luck was apparently out to kill him today. Ceres cocked her head, listening. Her eyes hardened back into command steel. "Stay here," she ordered. He almost laughed. "This is my shop." She ignored him, stepping to the hangar doors and punching a sequence into her wrist console. Her armor's plates rippled, adjusting tight to her form. Something under the gauntlets clicked like a locked ammo. "Wait," Darren started. Too late. She was already gone, a blur of black and silver slicing through the rising screams outside. Darren grabbed his old plasma welder and a rusted mining pick for good measure. He wasn't about to watch raiders torch his livelihood or the mystery woman he'd just wasted a whole day saving. He pushed open the hangar doors just in time to see Ceres drop 3 masked men in seconds. Each movement was surgical, a twist, a crack of armor, a flash of blue blade humming from her wrist module. Blood hit the sand and turned it black under the harsh sun. And then, for one terrifying heartbeat, she looked back at him, not as prey, not as a nuisance, but as if measuring whether he was worth saving too. The last of the raiders hit the dirt with a dull thud. Sarah stood in the middle of the dust-choked street, her armor smeared with streaks of someone else's blood, her blade retracting with a hiss. Around her, the fringe miners who'd cowered behind crates and cargo skiffs peered out wide-eyed. None dared step close. Darren stood frozen at the hangar door, mining pick forgotten at his feet. His heart pounded from the sprint outside, but not as hard as the question hammering in his head. What is she? Sarah's turned back to him, her face unreadable under the cracked helmet she'd locked back in place. She walked toward him with the fluid ease of a stalking predator that had found peace for now. "You didn't stay put," she said as she passed him. Not quite a reprimand, more an observation. Darren managed a crooked grin, though his hand still shook. "Neither did you." Inside the hangar, she collapsed onto the workbench again, the adrenaline bleeding away and leaving behind raw exhaustion. Without a word, Darren fetched a battered med kit. He wasn't a combat medic, but in the mining colonies you learned how to glue a man back together well enough. "Sit still," he muttered, pulling a roll of synth bandage from the kit. She didn't resist when he unlatched her chest plate again. Beneath the plating, bruises blossomed like ink under her skin, proof that even living legends could bleed. As he patched her ribs, he found himself talking, partly to fill the silence that pressed on them both. Those raiders, they weren't local scum, too organized. They were after you, right? Ceres didn't answer right away. Her gaze drifted to the hangar's high window, where a shard of dusklight painted her armor in fading gold. Finally she exhaled, a sound halfway between regret and resolve. They serve the Concord, or think they do. My enemies have long memories. Darren paused. The Concord. He'd heard miners curse that name when taxes rose and supply ships vanished, but to him it had always been distant politics, fat governors and faceless admirals squabbling over star lanes. You're military, he guessed, but the word felt too small. No uniform, I know, bleeds light and moves like that. Saris gave him a slow, rueful smile. It was both human and inhuman, the kind of expression that made a man realize he was standing before something larger than the world he knew. I was an empress, she said softly. Once, before betrayal, before exile, before this. Silence filled the hangar so completely that even the wind outside seemed to hush. Darren let out a short laugh, though his chest tightened with the weight of it all. So, let me get this straight. I dragged in a dying empress, patched up her fancy armor, and now her enemies think she's dead. Until they realize I'm not, Saris said, her eyes locking with his. He ran a hand through his grease-matted hair. Well, that's just perfect. A faint chime broke the tension, her wrist console flickering to life. A ghostly blue projection hovered above it, alien glyphs scrolling, punctuated by a single word, blinking in a script Darren couldn't read, but somehow understood. Retribution. Saris flexed her gauntleted hand, the armor's servos humming like a caged storm. For the first time, Darren glimpsed the full gravity behind her calm. Not just a soldier, but a ruler forced to become her own avenger. Darren Finch, she said, almost formal, you have already risked your life for me. Leave now while you still can. He laughed again, though fear crawled his spine. He thought of the debts, the stale air of this backwater, and the chance to see something bigger than a mining pit before he died. Lady, you think I'm smart enough to walk away now? For the first time, she truly smiled, a razor edge wrapped in the warmth. A storm rolled across the fringe outpost, not of rain, but of warships. Orbit lit up as the first Concord scouts slipped out of stealth, silver knives against the black. To the miners below, they were silent stars. To Saris, they were the sharpened fangs of the Empire that once called her Empress, now come to finish what betrayal had begun. Darren stood beside her in the hangar's open bay, a battered pulse rifle hanging loose in his grip. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't even a good shot. But beside her, fear felt different, like something too small to matter when galaxies trembled. Final checks, Saris said, her voice calm as she inspected her restored armor. Each plate gleamed where he'd welded the fractures, old damage reborn into a fresh mosaic of scars. You're really going to face them alone? Darren asked, wiping sweat from his brow. His pulse hammered in his ears. I won't be alone. She regarded him, visor raised so he could see her eyes, those ageless eyes that once commanded fleets and now burned with a survivor's fury. You stood by me when I had nothing. Now stand back or stand beside me. Darren laughed, breathless. I already picked my side. Just tell me where to shoot. Above them, the air split open, the shriek of dropships descending like spearheads. The dusty plain outside the hangar turned to chaos. Figures in polished Concord battleplate formed up, weapons sweeping the shadows. Orders barked in languages Darren couldn't place, but Saris understood every word. Stay behind cover, she told him. Then she stepped forward, alone at first. When the Concord soldiers saw her, they hesitated. She knew why. They'd been fed lies, that she died in exile, a relic of a lost crown. And yet here she stood, armor whole, eyes bright, living defiance made flesh. "Your Empress commands you," she called out, voice amplified, carried by the suit's hidden speakers. Even so, Darren heard the quiet steel beneath. A captain, braver or more foolish than the rest, raised his rifle. "You are no Empress. You are a traitor." His words ended in a flash of light. Saris moved too fast to follow, a phantom of silver and fire. By the time the man's body hit the ground, the line of soldiers broke like waves against stone. In the chaos, Darren peeked out, firing clumsy bursts to keep the invaders from flanking her. He felt useless and terrified, and more alive than the mines had ever allowed. One by one, the Concord fell or fled. The few who dropped weapons and knelt were spared. Saris did not want to slaughter her own people. She only wanted them to see, to remember. When the last ship lifted off in retreat, the outpost was silent save for the wind. Darren leaned against a crate, pulse rifle smoking, grinning like a fool. "You just fought off an Imperial purge with a half-broken suit and a miner with a bad aim." Saris removed her helmet, sweat darkening her hair at the temples. She looked down at him, exhaustion softened by the ghost of a smile. "No," she said, "we did." The surviving villagers began to emerge, seeing their unlikely savior clearly for the first time. A handful dropped to one knee, the old gesture echoing across the dusk. Darren stepped up beside her, shoulder brushing her armored one. "So, what happens now, Your Majesty?" Saris looked to the stars, the same stars that had once crowned her and betrayed her. "Now," she said, a spark of royal resolve reigniting behind her eyes, "we rebuild what they tried to erase, and we remind the galaxy what happens when it forgets who we are." In that moment, Darren knew his life would never return to simple days of mining dust and rusted tools. He was bound to a story older and greater than himself, the rebirth of a queen, and a mechanic's accidental rise beside her. Together, beneath the starlit sky, they faced tomorrow, Empress and miner, exiles no longer,